I wasn't invited to my wife's sister's wedding even after paying for it. She said I didn't fit the vibe, but the smile vanished from her face when the venue canceled everything at the last minute and she realized this. I still remember the exact moment I found out I wasn't invited to my wife's sister's wedding. Not through a heartfelt conversation. Not even through a passing mention. No. I discovered it the way someone finds out about a party they were never meant to know about. Through social media. I was in my office at the shop finishing up some paperwork when I absent-mindedly scrolled through my phone. And there it was, a picture so polished, so perfectly curated that it looked like it belonged on the front cover of some high-end wedding magazine. A beautifully designed invitation card, embossed with gold lettering, delicately placed on a white satin fabric. The caption read, "The countdown begins. Can't wait to celebrate with all my loved ones on the most special day of my life." All her loved ones, but not me. For a second, I just stared at it, my brain struggling to register what I was seeing. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe my invitation was still in the mail. Maybe she just hadn't gotten around to telling me in person. After all, I had spent the last 6 months bending over backward to make sure she had the wedding of her dreams. I was the one who paid for the venue deposit when Camille and her fiancé, Daniel, were short on cash. I was the one who covered the catering advance when my in-laws hesitated. I even gave her money for her wedding dress. Ironically, one I hadn't even seen yet. So, of course, my name had to be on that guest list, right? I scrolled through the comments under the post. My stomach twisting. Friends, relatives, colleagues, everyone was gushing about how excited they were to be part of the big day. Someone even joked about how exclusive the guest list must be. Exclusive. That's when the sick feeling started to creep in. I sent Camille a message. Nothing dramatic. Just a simple, "Hey, I saw the post. I never got my invite. Did it get lost?" And then I waited. My phone sat on the desk in front of me, screen up as if I expected her reply to appear within seconds. But the 3 little dots never came. An hour passed, then 2. By the time the sun had set, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe she was busy. Maybe she just forgot to reply. And then at 10:34 p.m., my phone buzzed. "Camille, hey, I was going to talk to you about this. I hope you understand, but we had to make some tough choices with the guest list. It's a very curated event, you know? We had to keep it elegant. No offense, but you don't really fit the vibe. I know you'll be happy for me from afar, though. Love you." I read the message 3 times before it really sank in. I wasn't just forgotten. I was intentionally left out, and I knew exactly why. I wasn't like Camille's friends, the ones with their polished nails, expensive suits, and artificial laughs that filled high-end cocktail parties. I didn't work in an office with a shiny title or talk about investments over brunch. I owned an auto repair shop, a successful one at that, the kind that made very good money, especially since I specialized in luxury vehicles. But that didn't matter to my wife's family. To them, I wasn't a businessman. I was just a grease-stain mechanic, a guy who always smelled like gasoline, a man whose hands were permanently rough from years of hard work. Camille had always looked down on me for that. She thought real success meant sitting in an air-conditioned office, wearing a suit, running a respectable business, not running a garage, no matter how profitable it was. She never said it outright, but I saw it in her eyes every time I showed up to family dinners straight from the shop. The slight wrinkle of her nose when I walked in. The way she introduced me to her friends with a quick dismissive, "Oh, my brother-in-law just runs some car shop." Like I was some embarrassment. And now, after everything I had done for her, she had curated me out of her perfect little wedding. I had financed the wedding and somehow I wasn't good enough to attend it. I should have seen it coming. It wasn't the first time my in-laws had made me feel like an outsider. The signs had been there for years. Small jabs at family gatherings, dismissive comments about my business. The way my wife's parents beamed with pride when Camille got promoted at her marketing firm, but barely acknowledged when I expanded my shop. But no matter how they treated me, I never said no when they needed me. When Camille wanted a lavish wedding but couldn't afford it, I was the one who stepped in. I covered the venue deposit, the catering advance, and even part of her dress. And I never asked for anything in return. I did it because that's what family was supposed to do. You know how expensive weddings are. Camille had whined one night over dinner at my in-laws' house, swirling her wine glass dramatically. "If you want something nice, you have to pay for it." I had replied, half joking, "Easy for you to say." She had huffed, "You don't have student loans. You don't have to keep up a professional appearance. You wear the same boots every day." That was Camille in a nutshell. She equated success with appearances. She never cared that I built my business from the ground up, that I worked 60-hour weeks to make sure my employees had stable jobs, that I earned every damn dollar I had. To her, I was just the guy with oil-stained hands and working-class problems, but I still helped. I still wired the money without hesitation when she and her fiancé came up short. I told myself it was for family, that I wasn't doing it for recognition. Yet here I was, not even worthy of an invitation. The night I read her message, I didn't sleep. I kept going over every moment of the past few months, trying to pinpoint when exactly she decided I wasn't good enough to be seen at her wedding. Was it when I showed up to a family gathering straight from the shop still in my uniform? Was it when she introduced me to her fancy friends as my sister's husband? He works with cars. Or had she always thought of me this way? At 5 a.m., I sat in the dim light of my kitchen, staring at my phone. And then, as if the universe wanted to mock me one last time, another message came in. Camille, hey, hope you can still help with the final payment for the cake. It's due Friday, XO. I stared at the screen and then I laughed. I laughed so hard I had to put my coffee down. She really thought I was still going to pay. She thought I would swallow my pride just like I always did. She had no idea. By the time the sun rose, I had already made my decision. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just going to take it. I was done. I wish I could say Camille's wedding snub was the first time I'd felt like an outsider in my wife's family, but that would be a lie. This wasn't some shocking betrayal that came out of nowhere. It was just the final blow in a long list of slights, dismissals, and quiet humiliations. The signs had always been there. I just chose to ignore them. At first, I thought it was just in my head that I was reading too much into the way my in-laws talked about me, how their polite smiles always felt a little strained, how their conversations seemed to shift whenever I walked into the room. But the truth was simpler. They never respected me. Not because I was a bad husband, not because I treated my wife poorly or made her life difficult. No, it was something much shallower than that. They didn't respect me because of what I did for a living. I wasn't one of them. Patricia, my mother-in-law, never said it outright, but her face always did. She was the kind of woman who cared deeply about appearances, the kind who measured success by titles, prestige, and the circles you moved in. In her eyes, I was an anomaly, a mechanic, a blue-collar guy in a family full of white-collar professionals, and that, in their world, was a problem. The not-so-subtle hints. The first time I felt it was at one of their dinner parties, a few months after my wife and I got married. Patricia had invited some family friends over. Successful, polished people in expensive clothes who sipped wine and talked about hedge funds and investment portfolios like it was small talk. I wasn't exactly comfortable in those settings, but I did my best. At some point, one of the guests, some corporate guy with an over-gelled haircut, asked me what I did for a living. I own an auto repair shop, I said. I wasn't embarrassed by it. Why would I be? I had built my business from nothing. I employed a team of skilled mechanics. I worked on luxury vehicles that most of the people in that room couldn't even afford to repair, let alone own. But instead of a nod or a polite "that's great," the guy just blinked at me. Then he laughed. That's different, he said, glancing at Camille. I guess every family needs a hands-on guy. The conversation moved on without me, like I had never spoken at all. I saw the way Camille stiffened in her seat, pretending not to notice. The way Patricia took a slow sip of her wine and didn't jump in to defend me. I had shrugged it off at the time, told myself it wasn't a big deal, but that was just the first of many moments like that. Every time we visited my in-laws, it was the same story. The first thing Patricia would do when I walked in was glance down at my hands, the hands of a man who worked for a living. She never said anything, never asked if I washed up before coming. But the way she wrinkled her nose, the way she subtly adjusted her silverware like she was afraid I'd leave grease stains on the tablecloth, it was all the answer I needed. Richard, my father-in-law, was different. He wasn't openly condescending. He was just absent. He didn't look down on me, but he also never stood up for me. He let Patricia and Camille do the talking while he just nodded along, avoiding conflict like it was an Olympic sport. But the worst part, the part that actually got to me, was how Camille introduced me to people. This is Marcus. Oh, he runs a car shop. Like, I was some guy who changed tires for a living. Like, I wasn't the owner of one of the most successful auto repair businesses in the area. Like, my job was something she had to gloss over because it wasn't impressive enough. I had heard Camille introduce her friends and colleagues before. This is Victoria. She's a financial consultant at Wells & Barclay. This is Jeremy. He's a project manager at a tech firm. This is Ethan. He runs a startup in digital marketing. But me? I was just Marcus who worked with cars. That was how she saw me. That was how they all saw me. And yet, when it came time for money problems, oh, suddenly, I wasn't just a mechanic, I was family. Over the years, I lost count of how many times I stepped in financially for Camille and her parents. They never asked directly, of course. That would have been too obvious. Instead, it was always hints, complaints, subtle little digs disguised as casual conversation. Weddings are so expensive these days. You wouldn't believe how much venues charge now. Ugh. Catering is impossible to afford, but what choice do we have? The deposit is due next week. Honestly, I think the dress is more important than the venue, but it's just so hard to budget for everything at once. And every single time, I did what I thought was the right thing. I paid. I covered costs. I sent money. I made sure everything went smoothly, thinking that maybe, just maybe, this time they'd actually appreciate it. But appreciation never came. Recognition never came. Instead, I got reduced to an ATM in their eyes, a wallet that smelled like gasoline. When Camille's wedding came around, I had already wired thousands. I told myself it was for family, that it wasn't about being included. It was about making sure my wife's sister had her dream wedding. But when the invitations went out, when the guest list was finalized, suddenly, Marcus wasn't part of the dream. The night I got Camille's message telling me I didn't fit the vibe, I thought back to every moment I had ignored. Every dinner where I sat in silence while they bragged about Camille's promotions, but barely acknowledged when I expanded my business. Every introduction where I was just the guy who worked with cars. Every time Patricia glanced at my hands before I picked up my fork, and suddenly, it all clicked. They never wanted me there. They wanted my money. They wanted my help, but they never wanted me. And for the first time in years, I stopped lying to myself. I wasn't family to them. I was just a tool they used when it was convenient. But that was about to change. Because this time, when they came asking for more, they were going to find out what happened when the tool they always used stopped playing along for good. I don't know what I was expecting when I drove to my in-laws' house that morning. Maybe some kind of explanation, maybe a weak apology, maybe even the slightest hint of guilt. But what I got was something much worse. When I arrived, I didn't bother knocking. I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. I had been part of this family for years, had eaten countless meals at this table, had paid for more things than I could count, and yet, I wasn't worthy of an invitation. I was about to walk in when I heard voices coming from the kitchen, and I stopped. It was Patricia and Camille. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the second I heard my name, I couldn't move. "Well, you know how he is," Patricia said, her tone dripping with quiet disappointment. "I just don't want him embarrassing me," Camille replied. I felt something in my chest tighten. "Embarrassing? It's going to be a sophisticated event," she continued. "I can't have him showing up looking like he just crawled out from under a car." I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. "He's family," Richard mumbled. Though his voice lacked conviction, Camille scoffed. "Exactly, and he should understand that this isn't about him. I don't need him there making people uncomfortable. He doesn't belong in that kind of setting." There it was. They didn't just leave me off the list by accident. They didn't forget. They made a deliberate choice to erase me from the event I had funded. And not because there wasn't room or because the venue had strict rules. No, it was because they thought I wasn't good enough to be seen there. Because I wasn't a polished corporate man in an expensive suit. Because my hands were rough from work. Because I smelled like motor oil instead of designer cologne. And they were afraid I'd make them look bad. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The kitchen fell into immediate silence. Camille went pale the second she saw me, her lips parting slightly as if she had been caught in the middle of a crime. Patricia quickly busied herself at the stove, stirring something that didn't need stirring, pretending like nothing had happened. Richard, well, he did what Richard always did. He avoided eye contact and acted like he wasn't part of the conversation at all. I took a slow, deep breath, locking eyes with Camille. "So that's how you see me?" I asked, my voice calm. She hesitated before straightening her shoulders, her defense walls going up. "Don't take it personally. It's just not your kind of crowd. Not my kind of crowd." I echoed, crossing my arms. "Come on, you know what I mean," she huffed, rolling her eyes. "Everyone there is from the corporate world. Lawyers, executives, people who actually network. You don't have anything in common with them." There it was again, that same condescending tone. The same dismissal I had been hearing for years. I had built a thriving business from the ground up. I had employees who depended on me. I had more money than half of the people on our so-called exclusive guest list. But none of that mattered to them because I worked with my hands. Because I wasn't one of them. "Right?" I said slowly. "Because I don't sit in an office all day, that must mean I'm too dumb to hold a conversation." "I never said that," she said quickly, but her face gave her away. Patricia sighed, finally turning around. "Sweetheart, it's just a different kind of event. You have to admit, you do come off a little rough sometimes. You're always in those work clothes, and you don't carry yourself the way her guests do." "I own a business," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I make more money than half of those sophisticated people you're inviting. But because I don't wear a suit every day, I'm not good enough." Camille groaned. "It's not about money. It's about image. Look, you helped a lot with the wedding, and I appreciate it. But this is my day. I need everything to be perfect. I just don't think you'd fit in there." She said it so casually. So matter-of-factly. Like she was talking about a pair of shoes that clashed with her dress, not a person who had spent thousands of dollars making sure her wedding even happened. I exhaled slowly and nodded. Got it. Patricia's expression softened. Oh, don't be like that, sweetheart. We'll have a nice family dinner after the honeymoon, just us. That'll be more your style. I smiled, but it wasn't out of kindness. You're right, I said, grabbing my keys. That would be more my style, because in my world, when someone helps you, you don't turn around and treat them like garbage. And with that, I walked out before they could say another word. By the time I got back to my shop, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Camille. Hey, hope you can still help with the final payment for the cake. It's due Friday, XO. I laughed. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. She really thought I was still going to pay, that I would just swallow my pride like I always did. She had no idea. For years, I had let them treat me like an outsider. For years, I had paid my way into a family that never truly accepted me. For years, I had been their safety net, but that ended today. They wanted a wedding without me? Fine. That meant they didn't need my money either. I typed out a message, my fingers steady as I hit send. Sorry, I wouldn't want to embarrass you by being associated with your wedding. I'm sure you'll figure it out without me. Good luck. No emojis. No fake kindness. Just a clear final answer. Not even 5 minutes passed before my phone rang. Camille. I let it go to voicemail. Then Patricia. Then Richard. By the time I closed up shop that night, I had 12 missed calls. And for the first time in years, I ignored every single one of them. Because I finally understood something. They had never cared about me, just what they could get from me. And if I wasn't welcome in their perfect little world, then neither was my money. By the time I got home that evening, I was done. Not just done with Camille. Not just done with Patricia and Richard. I was done being the guy who always stepped up, always helped, always put family first, only to be treated like an afterthought. I sat on my couch, my phone buzzing non-stop beside me. 12 missed calls. First from Camille, then from Patricia, then from Richard. Even my wife had texted, though she hadn't picked a side yet. At least, not openly. Camille's last text summed it all up. You're seriously overreacting. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, but you already agreed to help. It's really selfish to back out now. Selfish. I had spent thousands of dollars to help make her wedding happen. I had paid for the venue deposit. I had covered the catering advance. I had even helped with her wedding dress, a dress I hadn't even been allowed to see. And yet, now that I wasn't willing to throw more money at a wedding I wasn't invited to, I was the selfish one. I put my phone down before I could send something I'd regret. I needed space. I needed to breathe. But before I could even get up to make myself dinner, there was a knock at the door. I knew who it was before I even opened it. I pulled the door open to find my wife, Lena, standing there, arms crossed. Her expression wasn't angry, not yet, but there was tension in the way she held herself, like she was bracing for a fight. You didn't answer my calls, she said. I leaned against the doorframe. Didn't feel like talking. She sighed. Can I come in? I stepped aside, letting her in. She walked straight to the living room, pausing beside the couch, looking down at my phone. The screen lit up again. Another call from Camille. Lena exhaled sharply. What's going on? I shrugged. You saw the post. Your sister didn't invite me to her wedding. Apparently, I don't fit the vibe. She rubbed her temples. I know. Camille told me. And Lena hesitated. Look, she handled it poorly, okay? But the guest list was tight, and she had to make tough choices. I stared at her. Right? And one of those tough choices was cutting out the person who paid for the wedding. Lena flinched. That's not what she meant. No? I folded my arms. Then what did she mean exactly? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like she was happy to take my money, but didn't want to be embarrassed by me in front of her fancy friends. Lena sighed. You're twisting this. Camille she wanted everything to be perfect. She didn't think you'd fit in. I finished for her. Lena closed her eyes briefly, like she was trying to find the right words. She's wrong, she admitted finally. I told her she was wrong. But Marcus, this is her wedding. It's her day. And now, you're making it about you by pulling your funding at the last second. I laughed. Oh, so now it's pulling my funding. Not refusing to pay for a wedding I wasn't even invited to. Marcus. No, Lena. I need you to really hear me, I said, my voice steady. Your family has never respected me. I've put up with it because I love you. I've ignored the little comments, the way they look down on me, the way they introduce me like I'm some guy who just changes tires on the street. I've let it go over and over again because I thought stupidly that one day they'd actually treat me like family. Lena looked away. She didn't disagree. But this was the last straw, I continued. I paid for that wedding, Lena. I made it possible, and I wasn't even worth a seat at the table. She shook her head. I get it, okay? I do. But you agreed to help, Marcus. That money was already set aside. Camille planned the wedding around it. If you pull out now, she'll have to figure it out. Just like she figured out how to leave me off the guest list. Lena's jaw tightened. I'm not backing down on this, I said. Your sister made it clear that she doesn't want me there. Fine. That means she doesn't need my money either. Lena sat down on the couch rubbing her hands over her face. This is going to cause a mess, she muttered. That's not my problem. She exhaled sharply. Marcus, you're better than this. No, I said. I'm just finally done being used. Lena looked up at me searching my face, and then after a long moment, she stood up. Okay, she said quietly. I won't try to change your mind. I blinked. I had expected more of a fight. You won't, she shook her head. No. Because you're right. They treat you like an outsider, and I should have stood up for you a long time ago. That knocked the wind out of me more than anything else. Lena, I love my sister, but she's wrong, she said, her voice firmer now. And my mom is wrong. And if they can't see that, then that's on them, not you. For the first time all day, my shoulders relaxed. Thank you, I said quietly. She stepped forward, wrapping her arms around me. I held her tightly, feeling some of the anger start to fade. Not all of it, but enough. I just want you to be okay, she whispered. I will be, I promised. But Camille? She was about to have the worst wedding nightmare of her life. And for once, I wouldn't be the one saving the day. The next morning, my phone was already buzzing before I even got out of bed. I ignored it. I had made my decision, and I wasn't about to let Camille or Patricia guilt me into changing my mind. I knew exactly how this was going to play out. They were going to cry, beg, and then when that didn't work, they'd get angry. I let them go through all the stages without my involvement. When I finally rolled out of bed and checked my phone, I had 17 missed calls. 8 from Camille, 5 from Patricia. Even Richard had tried a couple of times, though I doubted he had anything meaningful to say. And then there was a single text from Lena. Lena, brace yourself. It's about to get ugly. I smirked. They were already panicking. Good. Then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Camille. Camille, Marcus, I don't know why you're being like this. You know how important this wedding is to me. I get that you're upset, but that doesn't mean you should ruin my day over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. I had to give her credit. Camille was really good at twisting things. I typed out a response. Me? A misunderstanding is when someone forgets to send an invite. You made a choice. So did I. I put my phone down expecting that to be the end of it. I should have known better. At noon, Lena called. They're losing their minds, she said as soon as I answered. Good, I replied, sipping my coffee. Marcus, what? You know what? I sighed. Lena, your sister made it clear that I don't belong at her wedding. So why should my money belong there? Lena was quiet for a second. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that Camille, well, she never expected you to actually pull out. She assumed you'd still pay, and now they're scrambling. I smirked. That's not my problem. Lena let out a small laugh. Yeah. I told them you'd say that. And Patricia is freaking out because the venue is threatening to cancel the reception unless they settle the remaining balance by the end of the week. The bakery won't release the wedding cake until the payment clears, and Camille hasn't even finished paying the florist. I nearly choked on my coffee. She still owes the florist? Oh, yeah. I leaned back in my chair shaking my head. So let me get this straight. She planned this entire wedding on the assumption that I'd pay for everything even though she had no intention of inviting me? Pretty much. And she thinks I'm the problem? Yep. I chuckled. Wow. I almost have to admire the audacity. Lena sighed. Marcus, I'm not asking you to change your mind, but just be prepared. They're desperate now, and they're about to start playing dirty. Let them, I said. I'm done. By mid-afternoon, they had switched tactics. The text stopped being demanding and turned emotional. Patricia, Marcus sweetheart, I don't understand why you're being so cruel. Family helps family. We've always been there for you. That one made me laugh out loud. They had been there for me? Funny, I didn't recall them helping when I was working 16-hour days to build my business. I didn't remember them showing up when I had to grind from the ground up, struggling to keep my shop running in the early days. I didn't reply. Then came Richard. Richard, I know you're upset, son, but let's be reasonable. What's a couple of $1,000 to you? It's already planned. Just help her this one last time. One last time. That phrase made my stomach turn. There would never be a one last time with them. If I gave in now, they would keep taking. And I was done. By evening, I was expecting Camille's next move. She wouldn't beg. That wasn't her style. No, Camille would get angry, and I was right. At 7:42 p.m., she called. I answered, "What the hell is wrong with you?" She snapped before I could even say hello. "Nice to hear from you too, Camille," I said dryly. "Cut the crap. Marcus, you know what this is about? You're really going to screw me over like this just because you're throwing a tantrum? A tantrum? I repeated. You mean like how you threw a tantrum about me not fitting your vibe? That is not the same thing, she shrieked. You're right, I said calmly. Because what I did was set a boundary. You made it clear I wasn't part of your wedding. So I made it clear my money wasn't either. You're unbelievable, she hissed. You agreed to help, and I changed my mind. Silence. Then she muttered, do you even care that you're ruining my wedding? I smirked. No, Camille, I said. I care that you thought you could use me and get away with it. And then I hung up. For the first time in years, I felt light. No stress, no guilt, no obligations. I had always assumed that cutting ties even partially with my in-laws would be messy, that it would feel like a weight on my chest, but instead, it felt like freedom. Camille thought she could have the perfect wedding while treating me like a walking ATM. Now she was about to learn a valuable lesson. And the best part, I didn't have to lift a finger. The wedding was already falling apart, and I couldn't wait to watch it burn. The next morning, I woke up to silence. No texts. No missed calls. It was the calm before the storm. I wasn't naive. I knew they weren't done trying. They were just regrouping. Trying to figure out a new angle, a new strategy. And by mid-afternoon, they found it. I was at the shop, elbows deep in an engine, when my receptionist poked her head into the garage. Marcus, you've got a visitor. I wiped my hands on a rack. I'm not expecting anyone. She hesitated. It's Patricia. I should have known. I let out a slow breath, sent her to the office. By the time I stepped inside, Patricia was already seated across from my desk, her purse neatly folded in her lap, her nails tapping against the leather. She wasn't angry. Not yet. She was composed, which was more dangerous because Patricia didn't yell. She guilt. Marcus, she greeted, offering a tight-lipped smile. Patricia, I said sitting down. She exhaled. I don't want to argue with you. That's good because I'm not changing my mind. She flinched. Just barely. Marcus, I know you're upset, and I understand why. Camille handled things poorly. I'll admit that. But you have to understand, she was under a lot of stress, right? I said, so her stress gave her the right to cut me out of the wedding, but still expect me to pay for it? That's not fair, Patricia said, shaking her head. She didn't think you'd take it this way. What way? I leaned forward. Like someone who's done being used? Her lips pressed together. Marcus, this isn't just about you, she finally said. This is about Camille's wedding. It's her big day, and she's devastated right now. Without your support, things are falling apart. Then maybe she should have thought about that before she decided I didn't fit the vibe. Oh, for God's sake, Patricia muttered, rubbing her temples. There it was, the first crack in her patience. Good, because I was done playing nice. Patricia straightened her shoulders. Listen. I'll be honest with you. The venue won't let them in unless the remaining balance is paid by tomorrow morning. The bakery is holding the cake hostage. The florist is about to cancel the arrangements. This wedding is on the verge of collapsing, Marcus. Camille doesn't have the money and neither do we. I leaned back in my chair watching her. And Patricia stared at me waiting, expecting me to step in to do what I'd always done. But I just sat there saying nothing, letting her squirm. Her fingers tightened around her purse. You have the money, Marcus. You could fix this. I could. I agreed. Silence. A long stretched-out silence. Patricia's face hardened. You're really just going to sit there and do nothing? I didn't do nothing, I said. I paid for half this wedding already. I made sure Camille had the wedding of her dreams. She just decided I wasn't good enough to be part of it. So why should my money be? Because she's your family, Patricia snapped. I laughed. No, Patricia, I said. She made it very clear that I'm not. Patricia's breathing was uneven now, her mask slipping. I don't understand you, she said, shaking her head. You're acting like some petty, spiteful child. You're willing to ruin your own sister-in-law's wedding just to prove a point? I'm not ruining anything, I said calmly. Camille did that all on her own. For God's sake, Marcus, this isn't about principles. It's about being practical. The wedding is in 2 days. It's too late to change anything. You're putting Camille in an impossible position. No, Patricia, I said, standing up. Camille put herself in this position. She thought she could take my money and discard me like I didn't matter. She assumed I'd just roll over like I always have. And now, she's learning a valuable lesson. Patricia's face turned red. You'll regret this, she hissed. I smiled. Maybe, but not today. She stood up, smoothing out her blouse. Fine, she said. But don't expect us to come running back to you after this. Camille won't forget this, and neither will I. I shrugged. That's fine. I prefer my bank account over your approval anyway. Patricia's eyes burned with fury, but she said nothing else. She grabbed her purse, turned on her heel, and stormed out. I didn't expect to hear from Camille again, not after that. But that night, at 11:37 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from her. "Camille, if I invite you now, will you still help?" I stared at it for a long moment, then I typed out my response. "Me, enjoy your wedding, Camille. You'll have to figure it out without me." I blocked her number before she could reply. And for the first time in years, I went to sleep with a smile on my face because this time, I had one. The morning of Camille's wedding, I woke up to the sound of silence. No calls, no texts, just peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't stressed about fixing someone else's problem. I didn't have to chase after last-minute payments. I wasn't expected to step in at the 11th hour to save the day. I had removed myself from the equation, and, apparently, they were feeling it. Because at 11:27 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Lena's cousin, Sarah. "Sarah, bro, you're not gonna believe this. The venue just kicked them out." I sat up, rereading the message. I didn't need to ask why. I already knew. Camille had assumed, banked on, the fact that someone, anyone, would step in at the last second. She had spent months planning an extravagant, over-the-top wedding on the assumption that her blue-collar brother-in-law would just keep throwing money at the problem. But when that didn't happen, when she showed up that morning, expecting the venue to smile and let everything slide, she learned the hard way that bills don't pay themselves. I chuckled to myself as I got out of bed. Camille had spent all this time trying to curate the perfect wedding, making sure everything was just right, that the right people were in attendance, that the wrong ones, like me, were cut out. And now, her perfect wedding was unraveling before her very eyes. I didn't feel guilty, not even a little bit. I had warned them. I had given them every opportunity to make this right. Instead, they had assumed I'd cave, but I didn't. And now, they were paying the price. By 12:03 p.m., my phone lit up again. This time, it was Lena. I answered, trying not to sound too amused. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Marcus," she sighed. "It's a complete disaster." I smirked. "Oh, don't be like that." "Like what?" "Like you're enjoying this." I didn't say anything because honestly, I was. "Lena," I said, "I told them this would happen. I told them months ago that they were biting off more than they could chew. But Camille wanted a luxury wedding on a budget and thought she could just write my name on the check without inviting me. I know. And now she's learning a lesson." Lena sighed again. "Marcus, it's bad." "How bad?" "The venue literally locked the doors while guests were arriving. The wedding planner was running around in a panic. The cake never got delivered. The florist canceled the arrangements. Camille was standing outside in her dress, screaming at the event manager." I raised an eyebrow. "Screaming?" "Full meltdown," Lena confirmed. I shook my head. Camille always did have a flair for the dramatic. "Where's the wedding now?" I asked. "Richard's backyard. They had to move everything last minute. No decorations, no expensive catering. Just some folding chairs and a few trays of store-bought food." I nearly laughed. Camille had spent months boasting about how exclusive, elegant, and curated her wedding would be. Now, she was standing in plastic heels on uneven grass, watching her dream day crumble into mediocrity. The irony was almost poetic. At 1:15 p.m., my phone rang again. "Camille." I picked up this time. "What?" I answered, voice flat. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then, she spoke. "Are you happy now?" she demanded, her voice shaking. I leaned back in my chair, amused. "About what?" "You know exactly what," she snapped. "The wedding is ruined." "Oh," I said casually. "Didn't have enough money?" She let out a sharp breath, barely holding back her frustration. "You knew we didn't have enough," she hissed. "You were supposed to help." I chuckled. "No, Camille," I said. "You assumed I would." Silence. The kind that burns. Then, finally, her voice wavered. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why couldn't you just help?" And there it was, the part that really got her. She had never imagined a world where I didn't step in. "After everything we've been through," she continued. "After everything I've done?" That made me laugh. "Everything you've done?" I repeated. "Like what, Camille?" "Like taking my money? Like using me when it was convenient? Like treating me like an ATM while making it clear I wasn't good enough to be part of your life?" "I didn't mean it like that," she protested. "You never do," I said coldly. "That's the problem." Silence again. Then her voice softened. "So this is it," she murmured. "You're really just walking away?" I let out a slow breath. "I already did," I said. "You just didn't notice until now." And then I hung up. The wedding went on, just not the way Camille had planned. No extravagant decorations. No high-end catering. No five-star venue. Just a bare-bones backyard wedding thrown together at the last second. And from what I heard, Camille spent the entire night trying not to cry. She didn't enjoy a second of it. She was too humiliated, too focused on what wasn't there. The luxury, the status, the validation from people she so desperately wanted to impress. I didn't reach out. I didn't apologize. I didn't check in. I let her sit in the mess she created. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't the one cleaning it up, and I never would be again. For weeks after the wedding, I waited for the fallout to settle. The first few days were a mess. A constant barrage of texts, missed calls, and guilt-tripping from my in-laws. They tried everything. First, they played the victim, acting like I had committed some unforgivable betrayal. Then when that didn't work, they switched to anger. When I ignored those, they went silent. And that was when I knew they finally understood. I wasn't coming back from this. I wasn't their ATM anymore. I wasn't the guy who would quietly fix things while they continued to treat me like an afterthought. I was done. I never got an apology from Camille. Not a real one, anyway. She sent one text a few days after the wedding. "Camille, I don't want things to be like this between us. No. I'm sorry." No acknowledgement of what she had done. Just a vague attempt to smooth things over as if this was just a simple misunderstanding. I didn't bother responding. She didn't deserve closure. Not after everything. My in-laws had always treated me like a second-class member of the family. Now, they treated me carefully. Like they had finally realized I wasn't obligated to put up with their treatment. Patricia, who had spent years looking down on me, suddenly became polite. Not warm, not kind, but cautious, as if she knew one wrong word could push me into cutting ties completely. Richard? He remained as neutral as ever. He never stood up for me, but at least he wasn't actively against me. Lena was the only one who really understood what this meant. "You changed the dynamic," she told me one night. "They're afraid of losing access to you completely," and she was right. They weren't sorry. They were just afraid. Afraid of what would happen if I stopped existing in their world entirely. Afraid of losing the financial safety net they had always counted on, but I didn't care. I didn't care about their discomfort because for the first time in years, I had put myself first. It took months for the tension to settle. At first, there were awkward family gatherings where everyone pretended nothing had happened. Camille avoided me. Patricia tried to act like things were normal. Richard stayed quiet as always, but something had changed. They didn't ask me for anything anymore. No sudden financial emergencies. No hints about covering expenses. No expectation that I would step in and fix their problems. And that was my win. Camille never asked for money again. She didn't have to. She knew the answer would be no. Now, I live my life on my own terms. I still run my shop. Still work hard. Still get my hands dirty every day. But the difference? Every dollar I earn is mine, not theirs. Not a family fund for people who never respected me, just mine. And for the first time in years, I feel free because I finally understand. Respect isn't given. It's taken. And I took mine back.